website. And I would hate to see happen in Pioneer Park what's happening in Upper Luther Burbank Park. If you want to look up what's going on into Upper Luther Burbank, you have to look for something called Snake Hill, because all the kids call it Snake Hill. And you can see videos there of the kids actually riding and, you know, what they're doing there. And they build the jumps higher. They've been told not to make them higher than 4 feet, but they do. The city comes in, takes them down. They go back and put them right back up again. And it's about a group of 20 kids, although there are some off-island kids that also come to Upper Luther Burbank to ride. So my point is just to make sure that the Open Space Trust Board is aware of the issue and that people have listed Pioneer Park as a place to ride mountain bikes. That's really all I have to say. Any questions?
All right, well, thank you for that. Yes, any questions from other board members?
I guess not.
No, thank you for sharing that. Wasn't aware that that was happening.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna say goodbye then. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, that concludes our public appearances. I assume there's nobody else waiting. So let's move on to the approval of the minutes from the March and July meetings. So are there any changes or amendments to the March 18th meeting minutes?
So, Mr. Chairman, I have just one comment. Yes. I see that my name on today's agenda is not spelled properly, but it is spelled properly in the minutes. So in terms of consistency, I just wanted to make sure that that was caught.
Okay, let's make a note of that. I did not have any edits to make to the March 18th minutes.
Tom, I had
yes.
2 suggestions. So on page 2 of the meeting minutes, I think there's a minor typo where the word staff is mistyped as stat, S-T-A-T-T. But more interestingly, as I was reading through it, the minutes capture that reference the 2008 Forest Health Survey study. And yet, as I recall, I think the presentation was on the 2018 update to it. And I thought it would be useful in the sentence that says the Forest Health Survey included a detailed forest health plan broken into short, medium, and long-term objectives. If this is correct, it seems like it'd be useful to reference then that at that point, Kim was beginning to update us on the current update to the 2008 study. I hope that's clear.
Yeah,
so,
I had a similar thought and thought there needs to be a transition statement. The paragraph that begins results and findings address the following. There needs to be something that says that the transitions back to the 2018.
Can you take me to where you are on page 2, please?
Basically the middle of the page where it says results and findings addressed. It's like Jerry was saying, it's results and findings of 2018, but I also agree that something earlier needs to be introduced.
Are you finding it, Deb?
I have a sense of what you're trying to say here. Yes, I will incorporate something that makes it a little bit more clear.
Thanks. And other than that, I have nothing. Are you looking for a motion for approval, Tom?
yes.
So move.
Second.
And do I second? All right. All in favor of approving the minutes as they will be amended with the transition to from the description of the old or 2008 forest survey to the most recent one in 2018. All those in favor, raise a hand or say aye.
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 Any opposed? No, okay, the minutes are accepted as amended. So we'll move on to the minutes for the July 15th meeting. Are there any edits to propose for, or amendments to propose for the meeting, the minutes from that July meeting?
I have another two. Yeah, but I was hoping someone else would go first. So again, a simple typo, the word priority is misspelled with an extra U in there at the bottom of page 1, the second to last paragraph on page 1. And then as I read the minutes towards the top of page 2, on the upper third of page 2, there's a sentence that says the open space, the OSCT provided direction to erect a structure along the center gravel area to encourage people to park solely along the street and report back to the effectiveness in the September meeting. And I think that that sentence belongs midway down page 3, after we had the discussion about parking on 84th Avenue Southeast. And then that was all I had.
Yeah, we can definitely move that, Jerry. I appreciate the find on that error. We will move that
And
piece of
I
business.
have just incorporated all of that.
Okay.
As you all know, we were working a little bit behind between audio and having lost Kim. It was a little bit of a jump, so.
Yeah, no, thank you. They were great, other than those two little things.
Changes noted. Thank you.
All right, so do we have a motion to accept the minutes as amended?
So move.
And a second?
Seconded.
Okay, thank you. All those-
Everybody's
okay.
too polite. They're waiting
Yes.
for the other person to go.
So the typo and the paragraph regarding the direction on the setting up a structure to encourage parking along the street near the middle entrance of the northwest quadrant, that will be moved down to an appropriate location. So with those edits, we're voting on approval of the minutes as those amendments are to be added. So all in favor say aye or raise a hand.
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay, so those minutes are accepted as amended. Then the next item on the agenda is the review of the relevant chapters of the Parks and Recreation and Open Space plan to be reviewed and approved by the Open Space Conservancy Trust. So let's move on to a presentation. Do you have a presentation for us?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I can take it from here.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm not sure I've met all of you yet, but my name is Jessie Bond and I'm your city manager. I am actually leading the update process for the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. Not that that is a traditional task of the city manager, but given our staffing situation and the fact that I'm a Parks and Rec director, I stepped in to pinch hit. So here I am. Meryl Thomas-Schatt is joining me tonight, and she is helping with the plan update as well. And certainly Paul and Elaine have been supporting. So I don't have a PowerPoint tonight. I wanted to keep my talking, to the bare minimum. Just a couple high-level comments. The Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan is your citywide strategic plan for parks, recreation, open space, trails, facilities. The plan, and this is really important, does not take the place of the plans that you have done for Pioneer Park and Engstrom, right? It's not a replacement. It's intended to complement. And And it really actually focuses probably on more of other things. So that's something that we need to watch for, right? They need to talk to each other, but they don't replace those critical plans. I said the same thing to Arts Council last week. They have a whole comprehensive plan on arts. Again, the PROS plan, which is our acronym, doesn't replace the cultural arts plan. So we've been on a bit of a bucking bronco journey with this plan. We started, got out of the gates, and then the pandemic happened in early 2020. We suspended work. We couldn't keep it going. And we started up again at the end of 2020. We are on track, right, Meryl? We are on track to adopt this plan in the first quarter of 2022. So here's where we are. We have chapters drafted. They're not coming to you all in order, which some people scratch their head about, but it's coming together. So I'm here tonight really to talk about 2 chapters. I'm looking for early feedback. This plan still has about 3 or 4 more months to go of draft review. So if you have a later suggestion, we'd be happy to receive it. So I'm going to do them backwards based on, I think, the way they're in your agenda. So chapter 9 is the open space chapter, and it's now called Open Space, Land Conservation, and Stewardship. When you read this chapter, really what Elaine and I are trying to do, and Elaine and I still have some adjustments that we'll be making, but when you read this initial draft, what we want to make sure is that the broad themes are captured, right? Does this generally align with the way the city manages all of our open space, not just the properties that you steward, our thinking on land conservation and broad stewardship themes? Chapter 9 is a background chapter, right? It's in there because we want to have a point in time narrative about where the city is on this specific subject. I should have said this earlier. One of the reasons we adopt this plan is to remain eligible for state grants. When you see the draft plan come to you, you will ask, why is this here? Why is this in this order? The layout of the plan is largely prescribed by the Recreation Conservation Office, RCO. So that's why it's built the way it is. But nonetheless, we plug in these background chapters so that anybody that picks this up understands what it is we're trying to convey. The meat and potatoes, though, the things that matter really show up in the goals section, chapter 4. We'll talk about that in a minute. And in the capital plan, where we recommend funding for capital projects. So I want to stop talking there. And again, looking for high-level feedback on chapter 9. As you read it, are we missing anything? Is there something that you would like stated differently? I don't need motions tonight, just for the purpose of discussion. I'll generally be looking for consensus. And by the way, you are the first board or commission to see chapter 9. So we'll be taking it back eventually to the Parks and Rec Commission for a final review. Anything jump out at you with chapter 9? Something you like us to change, add, enhance? Elaine, did you want to provide a thought or two about the work that you and I still need to do?
Sure, I'd love to, Jesse. So you'll notice that in the chapter 9 draft that was included in the agenda packet, there are several sections where either Jesse or myself put in little highlighted markers about particular sections that need a little bit more. Some of the work that I'd like to make sure we really address is on the importance of sustaining restoration work that's done in the open spaces over the long term. So really conveying the idea that that the investment on the front end of restoration is not self-perpetuating. It is to some degree, but that it will continue to need inputs, and that for the amount that is invested in those lands and really getting them back into good health, we're going to want to make that message clear. Otherwise, I would also like to expand a little bit on our methods for accomplishing the work that we do the way that we do currently. which is a mix of many different methods. And I want to make sure that that's really well conveyed, and the way that those lands are assessed every year for their health. And then, one thing that Jesse and I have talked about is really capturing, looking forward in terms of the plans that have been established and the studies that have been done, particularly on trust lands, that we have a plan in place for going back and revisiting that data and then adjusting our management strategies as we go. So I know those are some that really jump out at me that I want to work on. You will notice there is a fair amount in here in little bits and pieces about stormwater. We've talked about the sort of the green infrastructure part of open spaces and how important it is. And sorry, there's someone knocking on my door. And so I'd like to make sure that that's really well addressed in this document, just really talking about maybe the bridge between those functions that hasn't been necessarily called out quite as explicitly in some of our documents. So really making sure that that's understood, what the benefits are to the health of Lake Washington and the water that's all around us and in our creeks. So those are some that jump out at me. I don't know if there were other ones, Jesse, that you wanted to call out specifically.
No. Elaine, if you need to go get your door, feel free. And if there are no comments on chapter 9, that's fine. Elaine and I will keep working on it. Oh, go ahead. I see Geraldine's hand.
Thanks, Jesse. Can I start by complimenting you guys on this great work? I began reading it, knowing there was a lot to absorb, and I tried to gather some thoughts and think about things that had been coming up during my time on the board, and I jotted them down. And as I read through these 2 chapters, you guys had caught them all. So that was really great to see. In the way that I just commented on the minutes, I have a couple detailed comments that I'd like to share, and then that's it. So I loved how you have community partnerships and volunteers. And you talked about volunteer management services, and what I thought was valid to point out is that these volunteers both come from both on and off the island. And I think that's clear from the listing of the bullets at the bottom of page 22, but I thought it might be worth saying in that first sentence of the second paragraph. For over a decade, the city's contracted to provide volunteer management services from both on and off island volunteers. A second comment then is addressing the matter that comes up in several places, and the document speaks about parklands in perpetuity. And I am all for no net loss of parklands, and I know there are circumstances where sometimes there needs to be a use of like a corner of a parkland for some reason or something. And I wonder what the discussion has been among your pros board about perpetuity as compared to no net loss of parkland.
That is, in fairness, probably the #1 policy issue that is being wrestled right now by the Parks and Recreation Commission. And I hope, I'm not sure I put this in the staff report. I certainly hope if any of you are available, you will consider attending our public meeting on Tuesday. It starts at 5:30, and we'll have, we have some polling questions, and then the small breakout group discussion is on that very topic of balancing the needs or desire for new amenities with preserving green space. There's been a no net loss conversation. Can we really, in fact, I would say the Parks Commission hasn't voted on this, but I've pushed them away from a hard and fast no net loss policy, because it becomes not practical to be managing like the installation of an ADA trail that's required. And it will be impervious, whether it's crushed gravel or paved. I think you guys know this. And then trying to go, it's just not practical, but we're trying to find other tools that still convey that theme. An ADA access is certainly a reason that you would put in a pervious or impervious surface, but paving over our parks is not what our community wants. The other thing that came out, we asked a question about, and I don't have the results for all of you tonight. We just pushed out a second pros plan survey. Hopefully you all took it. One of the top themes was open space management preservation. And so we're still going through the data, but that came out loud and clear. And Meryl, there was another one. Anyway, there's a strong theme, right? So we're still building the policies, the policy recommendation that will go to the council, Geraldine, to get to your question, to support that. Now, one of the things, and when we get to the goals chapter, maybe I'll hold my comment till there. What tools are in the toolbox to meet this perpetuity goal? That's where the Parks Commission is right now. How do we do this? Yeah, so probably, I don't know, Meryl, you can nod your head. A number one theme, right? Balancing uses and preserving green space.
Well, I think a lot of what we heard in that survey was open space, preserving open space, and also trails. We want to walk trails. And that even in itself, presents that question about balance. So that's something we are sort of hoping to get, general feedback from people who have a lot of different interests in our parks, because that balance issue can be applied anywhere.
Yeah, that feeds nicely into a comment that I had. I only had a chance to read briefly through chapter 9, but I noticed there were some paragraphs about some of the open spaces perhaps not being amenable to the construction of trails, but we may still need to have conservation activities in those areas in order to preserve the open spaces. I can think of where there are steep slopes, there may be concerns about the stability of the slope that need to be addressed, and similar things where there might be an accumulation of wood and flammable materials that would need to be addressed. So just some mention of these kinds of preservation activities in open spaces, even ones that are not very accessible to the public.
That's great. And I think in the sections that Elaine wants to remodel, that's probably one of the themes she wants to call out. It's a great point. Just because there's not a trail there doesn't mean we still have a responsibility to steward the land. So we'll make sure that comes out in our revisions. And Meryl and I are taking notes as you're all talking, so feel free to keep firing away here.
First of all, I agree. I mean, it's really well written and it's easy to read and enjoyable to read. But I also love the whole concept of, we've got objectives, goals, objectives, and recommendations. And I was wondering whether recommendations was going to have a section as opposed to just sort of the references that are in the objectives part. It seems to me that it would be helpful to have like a bullet point. Here are recommendations to achieve this objective.
We had the same conversation with the Parks and Rec Commission, and in an earlier version of that goals chapter, the recreation or the recommendations were married to the objectives, and it got a little confusing. So they had to strip all of them out. Most of them are action items related to capital projects. And so they're going to show up then in the project list. So an example not related to open space, but we're talking about doing a citywide playground plan. Well, that's going to require funding, so it will show up in that list. And then there's an implementation chapter, right? It says, how do we do all this? And I think that's where everything will eventually land.
Okay, so we're talking about the chapter 9, and then we seem to have transitioned to the goals chapter. So let's finish up.
I had another comment.
Okay, let's conclude the discussion on chapter 9 if we can, and then move on to the discussion of the goals and recommendations in chapter 4. So at this point, are there further comments related to chapter 9?
What, well, my comment is sort of related to chapter 9, but more overall. You know, one of the ways we create open space is to have conservation easements and right-of-ways. I wonder if the city has gone back to evaluate those conservation easements and right-of-ways to determine historically how effective they've been in terms of preserving open space. Because I know it gets used fairly often in the city. And I know of circumstances, and I sort of blame both the sort of building permitting process and homeowners, I guess, that those conservation easements are no longer conservation easements. So it would seem to me that some kind of evaluation of historic practices as in their efficacy would be a good thing to look at.
And, you know, we have not done, Elaine will correct me if I'm wrong, a comprehensive assessment of all of the tools that have been applied to protect open space areas. Conservation easements are one. I think it's on that very long to-do list. But when we get to chapter 4, I want to, Maria, it relates to both your comments and Geraldine's regarding the goals and objectives and some ideas we have on this.
Yeah, I think that does relate to chapter 4. So let's close the discussion on chapter 9 and move on to.
Looks like you might have one more comment.
Oh, yes.
Tom, I just have one more thing. Thank you again, everyone who's provided the research and the writing on this. It means a lot, not only as part of the Open Space Board, but also as one of the forest stewards for the city. It means a lot to me that you guys are taking a really comprehensive look at this. One question I have is the section about water conservation. Of course, while we recognize how imperative that is, so long as we're still planting a lot of the native plants in these systems, I'm wondering where there's going to be the conversation and the explicit addressing of watering new plantings, because we do lose, a number of plants with our increasing droughty summers and the heat dome and things like that, and curtailing of staff and budgeting. The capacity to be able to water a lot of these new plantings, and I see a lot of our plantings being lost. So I'm wondering how and where that's going to be addressed.
We will make a note. This section was relatively new. Outside of the properties, the trust properties, you probably recognize like Aubrey Davis Park, for example, is brown in the summers now because it doesn't make sense, not the trees and shrubs, but the grass specifically, to keep pouring water, resources into that large expansive park. It was a change that we have made over time. But your point is good, right? So we're really starting to ask ourselves, are we planting the right plants in our formal landscaped areas? And if we're not, we really have to think about not only the success of the plant in these changing climate conditions, but what it's costing us to maintain them and make some changes. That is a really poor explanation. Elaine can do it a lot better than I can. This section needs some more meat on the bones. Elaine shared that with me on Friday. She wants to build it out. So we'll take your comments. The other side of getting our new landscaped areas established and healthy and keeping them going is the other challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. And specifically, I'm talking here about like the restoration work, so like the native plantings with the ferns and the shrubs and the young trees. So I really appreciate you guys taking a deeper look at that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I really do think, Hillary, also that we can tap the 10-year evaluation of the open space vegetation management plan also, because it really did speak about all of the challenges that we're facing with climate change and how we build in climate resiliency. Both, really it's applicable across all of our lands, both for the restoration and for our formal landscapes. But I really do think that your point is well taken, addressing what the maintenance needs are, as part of what I was talking about also about sort of what we need to do ongoing, but what it takes when we try and plant new plants to really make sure that they're surviving and that investment is well taken care of. But I also think, to Jesse's point, that having specific language about plant selection, that's one of the things that we knew we really needed to dive into. And I think it's, it's a slightly different conversation maybe for restoration than formal landscapes, but I think it's guided by really similar principles, right? I mean, we've seen over the last couple of years which things have been able to survive better and in which soils. So it's sort of this constant adaptive management and really figuring out what is the palette that works best in different areas. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank
Jerry,
you, Elaine.
I see your hand is raised, Jerry. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. When I think about issues that we have talked about at our board here, and one thing I didn't see discussed here, and I don't know where or how you would do it. The issue of dogs and leash and on leash seems to me to be a pretty major issue from what I see. Not
It's
sure it's a
avoidance.
master plan issue, but just wondered how you guys are thinking about that. And I'm
Just avoiding it. I'm just avoiding the whole topic.
wise, very wise move.
Very smart.
I'm kidding. Actually, it's funny now that you mentioned it, it did just occur to me that we're pretty silent on dogs. That may have been a psychological reaction of mine as we were drafting the plan. So
There were references to dog walking and
yeah,
in writing and all that. So I saw it there, but it seems like an issue that is important to Islanders.
that's an incredible catch. Thank you.
So we threw 84th in there to throw them off the scent, huh?
A similar thought is, and Rita brought this up, I run into mountain bikes in Pioneer Park pretty frequently. I'm never quite sure how pedestrians, dogs, and mountain bikes sync up very well. And I guess my thought really is do we have alternatives to mountain bikes? I don't want to throw them out of the park if it's the only place they can ride. But I think that should be part of the overall plan, is really thinking hard about where bikes belong and don't belong. We've got a skating park, for example, but I don't know, other than streets, what we have in the way of bikes.
Well, you just hit on one of the other top 5 themes of the discussion so far.
Go Marie.
Yeah, good job. You heard public comment today about the Upper Luther, what we're now calling unofficially the bike skills area. And there's certainly, when we look at the demographics we serve in our park system, the teen and young adult group is perhaps the most underserved. They tend to prefer the skate park and like the bike skills area, for example. So there's definitely a desire, right, for more. Mountain biking is a top sport, top activity. The question is where? So the bike skills area we have at Upper Luther is constrained to a certain footprint. And so this is what the Parks and Recreation Commission is talking about is, well, what do we do, right? We have an ask, where would we put it? We don't have a great idea at this moment. I'm a little off topic, but I will mention a spray park, the parks that shoot water everywhere. That's also been an ask. So one of the things the Parks Commission is talking about is, well, do you fit a new amenity like that into an existing park and take green space, or do you have to decommission something to put something new in? Or do you have to buy property and make your park system bigger to accommodate these new amenities? So I don't have an answer to the bike question, but you're raising a good point. It's something the Parks Commission will hopefully pull together in their final recommendation to the council. But just to give some color commentary on the push and pull right now of that conversation.
So can I ask about another use? So the city just spent $1.5 million on a lot,
Mhm.
which is close to the high school in Northwood and I forget the name of that, Crescent, whatever, Crescent School, I forget exactly what it's called. Maybe it's someplace else in the pros plan I haven't seen, but what about pea patches?
You know, Meryl, I didn't look at the survey results. That hasn't been a top theme, but we did just ask again where that ranked. So I will, if it comes out in the survey results from this last round is higher, I imagine the Parks Commission will start talking about how we prioritize that amenity as well, those types of amenities.
Yeah, I took the survey. I don't remember seeing pea patch be, do you want a pea patch question?
It is in one of the questions. I know it is because either Meryl or Elaine added it when we were drafting the second survey. I think it might have been Meryl.
Right.
And I'll just say, outside of the pros plan, I think that the P-Patch program, there is room there for improvement and input to the Parks Commission. It's been kind of its own thing up there in the corner for a long time and probably overdue for a good look and maybe a revamp. So there may be ways we can address some of these things outside of the pros plan, but through the Parks Commission route, just to give folks more access and fill a need, if we see one.
Okay. Those are some general themes that can be added. And would you think that those relate more to the goals section of the plan?
I think some of the comments I just heard actually fit squarely in our next version of Chapter 9. I think the mountain bikes, P-Patch, dogs may end up in other spots in the plan, but I've written them down because they're important. So at least I will remember them as we get to the next chapters of the plan. And they may belong in the goals section too. So if comments on 9, we could go to Chapter 4 now.
If I could just make one more comment, I am a pea patcher, so it's a fairly passionate group. So it might be even useful, to poll, what the sense or some of the feelings or challenges are that that group is identifying. Meryl has worked with us in the past, and it seems like there's always, some major flare up every summer and, some recurring themes about, needs and challenges. So I think it might be useful, to go, to the folks who are actually engaged there and get a better or clearer sense. It'll be a diverse group. You won't have one view coming from the group, but I think it would be useful to highlight, what some of the issues are that they're identifying.
For that. Should we flip to Chapter 4?
Well, I had two thoughts, and I don't know whether they fit in Chapter 4 or where they fit, because there may be parts of the pros plan, we simply haven't addressed. But it seems to me like one of the goals ought to be to have a building code that meshes with the goals and objectives of the open space objectives. Just because when you build next to a park, or you take a piece of open land that's been vacant for generations, that there ought to be some thought in the building code about how that's thought about and protected. There is a good example behind the lakes here where they're putting in a new subdivision, but a significant part of one of the lots is now in a conservation easement. Which I think is a great example, as long as we have mechanisms for ensuring that it stays a conservation easement. I think that's a great idea, and it maybe belongs in this pros plan as a footnote or a thought or something like that.
So Maria, is your comment, I just want to make sure I understand, is it specific to public land, or is it how private property is developed? I just want to make sure, is it development next to public?
Yeah, I believe it means adjacent to open spaces and parks, or how can we ensure that the building code or the permits that are granted mesh?
That's the
with the
planning
overall-
commission.
Yeah.
Mesh with the,
If we're using conservation easements, the building code is the way to implement that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the other thought I had is, are we overlooking an awful lot of private land that is effectively parkland? Because if you look at some of the developed communities like the lakes, we have significant common areas. And the lakes, in fact, has a whole series of lakes. And it feels like there ought to be some discussion of how to encourage the use of those properties in a way that enhances our park system. But also how to interact so that the homeowners associations can benefit from the knowledge of the city and manage their properties in alignment with the goals of this, are these goals and objectives. So I don't know if there's a part of the pros plan that sort of meshes with that thought well, but it certainly seems to me like there ought to be, or there could be, an opportunity there.
So the last two comments probably squarely land in chapter 4. So I'm just going to say we're probably there now.
yes.
Okay.
So I want to go back to the building code comment, and I'm going to frantically scroll here. I wrote it down. I need to think about how I could or could not incorporate it. The words building code actually means something a little different. So I'm just going to say city code, or anyway, I've noted it, Marie. I'm not sure what to do with it at this point. The use of private open space properties, or the protection of private open space properties, or stewardship is a theme that we could build on here, right? Because we don't control those lands, but we could make a objective statement around partnerships or sharing of information or something like that to get there. We also hope at some point to either update or re-inventory those types of properties, because it all matters.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll give you a good example. In the lakes, we're not currently replacing street trees because we don't know how to get them watered. And you're facing the same problem.
Yeah. How about this? I will promise you that Elena and I will talk about this. I need to think about whether or not this belongs in the pros plan, or if it doesn't, because the pros plan is really specifically looking at public property. But I may be able to just have a broader statement about community. I mean, the urban forestry management plan kind of starts to speak to that. I don't want to keep rambling. It's in my head. Let me work on it.
I would just say about this, Jesse, and probably Paul could speak to it far more eloquently than I can, but right now, I would say some of those, quote unquote, private open spaces, or, these conservation areas within tracts, we do have some, pedestrian access easements across those. So, I think the way sometimes that we look at those as about connectivity and really improving walkability with it, you know, across the island. So it's sort of broadening that out. And yeah, Jesse, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. And Paul, I think that would be a good conversation about how or if that could be incorporated.
I will plant a seed. The city council, no pun intended, plant a seed. The city council will be doing, starting in 2022. I'm pretty sure they have to fund it, but the update to the citywide comprehensive plan. So, you know, the big dog is the overarching policy document for everything in the city. And I have to say, some of the themes I'm hearing tonight probably sit squarely in that plan. So I will think about how to capture these ideas and share them forward for that process, but also, you know, do some creative thinking about how to tie them back to here.
Yeah, I did notice there were several sections in the goals that talked about partnerships with the community or other organizations. And so you might use that as just a springboard, or at least a signpost for where to update the goals in order to include some of these ideas about the greater use of conservation easements and
Absolutely.
and private land that's effectively open space, and walking next to a beautiful piece of property is almost as good as walking across it. And so having these pedestrian easements is a good way of sort of making that available to the citizens.
That's great. So if I may, I had a section of the goals that I really wanted you to focus on, but I wanted to point you back to 1.1. And it's probably one of the most important statements to the Parks and Rec Commission, if I can speak for them. It says retain publicly owned parks and open spaces in perpetuity. That objective has been in place since the previous plan. We're starting to build on it though, because I think Maureen and Jerry, you both brought it up previously. Well, how do we do that, right? And most of what we've done could be undone by a future council, and that is, we're trying to figure out, well, how do you strengthen the protection? So that's the conversation that's happening at the Parks and Rec Commission. You'll notice in 1.1, the list of options right now, I know this objective is going to be rewritten. We're still working on it. Conservation easements, zoning changes, or other strategies. So one of the things I'm taking a look at is many of your open space areas and your parks are actually zoned residential. So we started to think about, well, one of the ways to make it really challenging to build over the top of a park is to create a park zone that clearly defines what can or can't be done there. Now that zones can be amended, but it takes a lot of work. So that's why the word zoning changes are there. The sentence I thought might pique your interest was evaluate the transfer of some or all open space areas to the Open Space Conservancy Trust. This came up at the last Parks and Rec Commission meeting. And the request was made to just move them, and I negotiated for it to say evaluate, because as you all know, some open space areas are basically stormwater tracts, and you know, we really need to think about what the goal is here and how we would do this, but I understand the theme. So when you look at 1.1, is there anything that you would change the way it's written now? I thought this would be a particularly important objective to get your feedback on.
Well, I read that with considerable interest because I thought that a really good way of preserving the open space on the island is to actually move it under the purview of the trust. So I would say I'm fully in favor of that course of action.
Marie, you brought up earlier conservation easements, are there any other tools that you've thought about or a way that you would have revised this objective? I'm gonna make sure I'm taking notes here.
Well, other than, finding tax incentives to encourage people to transfer land. I'm not sure I'm a big fan of that, but it's certainly an effective way of doing it. I also think a really good catalog of what remains open space. So I'll give you another good example of, we've talked in the past, apparently there is a Swedish community land that abuts Lake Washington that could actually connect Pioneer Park and Instrom to the lake. So that's one sort of open space that we would at least put on a priority list for acquisition if we could. But there's also pockets. I mean, I'm watching on the west side of the lakes, there's been for a long, long time, a lot of open space. One lot is now being developed. There's one next door to it that's very wild. That if it was on a list that everybody's aware of, maybe that's something else we could think about using as a way of encouraging people, at least make it a thought before they just sell it to a developer. So yeah, and the trust board has talked an awful lot about, do we transfer more into the trust? Because there's always been, and I don't particularly agree with this thought, but a thought that there is a conflict between the trust board thinking about Pioneer Park in connection with, say, the hillside of Mercerdale. I mean, to me, they ought to be thought about as a single community resource. And if the only way of making that possible is to put things into the trust, well, okay. But I don't know that there aren't more informal ways of doing that.
I've been typing notes as you've been talking. I should have mentioned this earlier. This is a key theme, and I would say, at least in the short time I've been with the city in the last 3 years, I think we might be trending in a slightly different direction. The notion was it's expensive to live on Mercer Island. It's expensive to buy land, so we probably can't do it. I will say from the top down, the council is starting to talk about, hey, the price is what it is. As our population's growing, if we have an opportunity to pick up, strategic parcels, we should, and they might be really expensive. The example I've used with the Parks and Rec Commission, and it's a park example, not an open space example, is Maidenbower Bay in Bellevue. If you've been over to that park, it was a whole bunch of very expensive private property acquisitions over the last 20 years. And they now have one of the most staggering, beautiful waterfront parks in our entire region. These things take 20 to 50 years. So what we're talking about is developing a land acquisition strategy. And it would literally be, Marie, this speaks to what you were talking about earlier, a parcel look at Mercer Island, identifying strategically the parcels we may want to acquire. A lot of this is done confidentially because it doesn't always serve us well to, advertise that we want to buy your property.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have lots of tools in your toolbox. Some people may even donate. So I'm excited. We put a survey question in around land acquisition. I haven't taken a look at those results yet, but that's something that's really being talked about seriously is we need to look at acquisition. So it's somewhere in here. I have to go find it in chapter 4.
And that's how Clark and Engstrom came, Clark Beach, right? And
Yeah.
Donations, right?
Yeah. So if anyone
Some of that,
your property,
I would just note that, someplace I read, there's still a significant population on Mercer Island that goes back a generation or two.
Mhm.
Particularly those kind of people, I think, would be motivated to donate land. Certainly what's being developed behind us, that was a guy who lived there forever. And I don't know that anybody ever thought to approach them and whether it would have been an appropriate place to buy land anyway, but you know, it's a thought.
No, I'll tell you that one of the first action items, I mean, we really need a tool as a city. We really need to know what we want to buy and why. That will largely be informed by the pros plan. Right now, when an opportunity comes up, we will go for it, but a broader strategy so that we can prioritize acquisitions. And it's not even just whole parcels, right? To whoever made the comment previously, it could be just easements, critical easements. Meryl will confirm this. The top project priority out of the last survey, I believe, was trail connections. So connecting trails. That surprised me. Maybe it shouldn't have, but that's a strong indicator of how we should be moving then on acquisition and capital funding. Well,
you know, I would comment on that as well. I mean, to me, connectivity is one of the frustrating things for me sometimes walking in different parts of the island is there's a trail, but there's no way of making it circular.
Yeah.
Which I think should be a high priority in terms of making trails circle back to the beginning point.
Well, you and the majority of the survey takers agree. So they want to be able to get somewhere. So I was hoping to conclude our time. Really, I'm open to feedback on any of the goals and objectives, but I really wanted to focus on goal 3 and the corresponding objectives there.
Before you move on, Jesse, it looked like maybe Hillary had a comment on the last bit.
Oh, it's not going to be long. Thank you, Elaine. I was just wondering in terms of the survey results, Jesse, did you have any kind of nuanced understanding about whether that connectivity was for pedestrian and like walkability or wildlife corridors, or I don't know if that came up at all in people's comments.
You know, we don't have that fine-grained answer. We asked the question a little more broadly, bikes and peds. So I'm going to go ahead and say it probably refers to all of it. Open space preservation and management also ended up ranking high. And I apologize, I've only seen the preliminary results. When we have the full package, I'll make sure Elaine gets that to you.
I'll just jump in. I'm looking at it and it's kind of the raw stuff, but it actually does sort of that highest ranking is connect gaps in the trail system. So I think it is sort of probably everything, but I think the folks were focused on kind of open space trails and
probably
walkability that way.
Perfect. Thank you, Meryl. Thank you, Jesse.
Okay, so you wanted to focus on the goals of section 3.
Clarify one thing before we move on.
Yes.
Question, I think for Jesse, when I led off with a comment about no net loss and in perpetuity, I wondered if we were talking about no net loss the same way. And to me, I'm wondering if the conversation has been that if you need 10 square feet of property for something, you could replace it with 10 or 20 square feet somewhere else. Is that, can you reference that?
I'm sorry. I appreciate you circling back because the conversation at the Parks and Rec Commission has been on a impervious surface and basically no net loss of green space in the park system. And in fact, objective 3.15 will eventually be an impervious surface objective. It just has to be, we have to figure out how to write it. So yeah, that was literally the thought that if you're going to put in a
ADA path, right?
Yeah, and I used a silly example with the Parks Commission explaining why I do not like something that prescriptive for the sanity of the park staff. But if you were going to put in a concrete pad for a park bench, then you literally have to go take out impervious surface somewhere else. So in the spirit, I don't think a concrete pad for a park bench is that it's desirable. So we're trying to think of a different way to get at the impervious surface objective. Meet the spirit of don't pave over the parks, but allow for kind of reasonable operating assumptions.
Okay, I just wanted to,
Thank you for that.
and I know there are people who say you should never, once something is parkland, it should never not be parkland. And I am trying to say once Mercer Island has a certain amount of parkland, we shouldn't go down from that. So
Now that is definitely agreed upon almost universally. I haven't heard, and that was where that perpetuity, if it's parkland, it is parkland.
just saying, I think it might be replaceable if needed in places on a spot. And I don't know if that's agreed upon.
That is a good question.
Hey, Tom, back to you.
So we're in goal 3 and you've got a slug of objectives here. Anything stand out? Feedback, revisions, additions?
3.5 was good.
Oh, yes. I have an editorial comment that I'll send to you later on that one. So.
You know, I was thinking that 3.5 and 3.7 are sort of the same thing. I mean, it seems like the Open Space Trust Conservancy is, and maybe separated them on purpose, but it's part of the citywide urban forestry management plan, right?
No, I would take the urban forestry management plan to be comprehensive, meaning that it also deals with private property owners. So.
Oh, okay.
You were called out specifically to make sure the trust had some love in this plan as a partner, you know, a key partner in stewarding our parks, recreation, and open space system. That's why 3.5 is there. We want to make sure everyone knows you're here, you're a partner.
So I guess, I mean, this is sort of, I've been doing more thoughtful walking in the park. And I had a thought that Pioneer Park could be sort of the demonstration forest for the whole park system, in terms of being where you go to get more. I would love to see more educational stuff in Pioneer Park, but also take advantage of the park to show in real life what forest redevelopment looks like. Mm-hmm. So I guess my sort of thought was calling out Pioneer Park to serve that function would be a good thing.
Oh, okay. We have objective 3.14, but it's broad, right? It hits on volunteer programs. And I think what you're talking about is something a little more specific around Pioneer Park is the showpiece, kind of the you just used a word, Marie, and I already lost it.
Demonstration forest.
Thank you. I'm writing it down right now.
Okay.
That seems like a good add to me. I'm looking, I will wordsmith it along with Elaine if there's agreement that writing an objective in that regard would be a good idea.
And Hillary, you had something to say?
I don't know if you guys are aware of this or not, but the environmental science course at the high school comes out and does a pond study here at Ellis Pond, which, you know, is interesting. You know, I'm glad they're doing it, but at the same time, it's like a pretty significant impact in terms of how many kids actually come out here. And they do water quality and all of that. And I'm a former science teacher, so I'm like all for that. But I feel like, to Marie's point, because it's a bigger park and there are designated trails and there's so much going on and there's this land use history and data, that it could present another really great hands-on opportunity for the kids in the AP environmental science courses. It might just be a plug and play kind of thing if you guys talk to the teachers over there.
This is an aside, Hillary, but they come over to the lakes also. And
Cool.
I've always loved, I wished that I could get the results. I have no idea what they find in our lake. I'd love to find out what they're thinking about our water quality.
It would be very interesting considering like how much of those water bodies serve as storm detention receptacles.
Anything else missing you'd like said differently, enhanced? By the way, if you wake up at 2 a.m., don't call me, but you can send me an email with an idea, something that occurred to you later.
Okay, so that was focusing on the section 3. Are there any other general comments for the goals chapter of the plan draft?
I can throw out 2 real quickly. On when I saw 1.11, 1.11, it talks to the acquisition of land, and I understood, you fleshed that out quite a bit today in this discussion. When I read it, I wondered if there should be partnering for improvements also. So capital investment in properties, renovations or something. So that's a consideration. Should it be land and improvements instead of just land? And I had a question about 1.7, which was the one about having park land within a half mile of people. And I would be interested in understanding how we are on that goal, whether that's something we're close to or whether that's aspirational.
0.7. I do have, I did not bring it. We have a heat map that shows where we are on that. So I will.
And I noticed that there was the adjective developed parkland in relation to that point. And could you give us a feel of why you make that distinction?
Sure. In that's in 1.7, to make sure that everyone has access to a space where they can go and recreate actively. I want to say the city of Redmond, I'm not sure they actually went there, but they have pretty advanced standards around accessibility for trails, distances and parkland acreage. I don't know if they've developed something for open space, X number of acres of open space per 1,000 residents. We don't have it in our draft.
So you would say it was mostly an accessibility issue then?
Yeah, this is the way I think about why these standards show up in plans. Backyards get smaller. People live in town, townhomes or condos or apartments. We want everyone to be able to get to a space where they can recreate actively. We also want them to enjoy passive trails and open space. So that's why the word developed is there. And also in 1.10, that's where the acres of developed neighborhood or community parkland standard comes from, which is actually a national standard. We're still working on what we want our acres per 1,000 residents, objective to be. We're fussing with that, but that's where that comes from. As we urbanize.
Yes.
So another element of accessibility, and I hate to even bring this up, is parking. I mean, there are a number of trails on the island that are wonderful trails, but the parking is hazardous.
Yeah.
53rd Street is a prime example. Or kind of unorganized, when I would put Pioneer Park in the category of unorganized. We haven't done a great job of directing people where to park. So, and that didn't seem like it showed up anywhere.
Oh, that's a good point. Parking's been, it hasn't been as much of a hot topic in the pros plan as it has been some of our other plans. But
Just
we should
it's addressed
look-
in, it looks like goal 1.6 on a more broad basis. So the last sentence says, seek opportunities to eliminate barriers at existing facilities and address goals identified in the citywide ADA transition plan. So I would take that to include sort of whatever those barriers are, and one of them would be accessible parking. Is that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think parking as a word ought to show up.
Yeah. I'm writing that down. I think it's good feedback. I need to think about where it belongs. I will tell you, I have this, we haven't shared it yet, not the latest version, the master list of all of the potential parks, trails, projects, forevermore. And our consultant went through every property we own, and adding a parking spot is recommended for a number of facilities, or improving a parking area, especially for ADA. We have some spaces that are really conducive to ADA access, but there's nowhere to park. So it's going to show up probably in a stronger theme in the capital plan, but as I'm talking out loud, I think we should add it somewhere here. So Maria, I'm not sure where yet, but I'm agreeing with you. Now, the counter to that is big parking lots are not, no one has expressed enthusiasm for that, but that's not what I heard you saying. It was just like, get to a trailhead, you need a place to park.
Yeah, and I think an important part is that there's simply no direction like park here. It's so everybody just says, okay, this looks like a good place to pull off, and that kind of random stuff leads to vegetation loss, and it would be better to have an established parking area and encourage people to park there. And I'm sure that many people would do that. They're just looking for a place to park so they can access the trail or whatever.
I think that Southeast 53rd is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Quite a bit of vegetation loss there.
These are great comments.
You know, this is also another part of it is crosswalks. I mean, the amount of walking from the QFC to Pioneer Park in the middle of the street, and I understand that there's rules about where you can put a crosswalk, but somebody's going to get hurt there one of these days.
That is probably one of our most challenging areas. Somewhere in here, we were working on and under section 4, which is at the direction of the Parks Commission. It needs to be remodeled a bit, but what we wanted to get in there is like safe trails. We need safe connections. You know, you've got to be able to go from point A to point B safely. You've got to be able to go from your home to a developed park to kick a soccer ball safely. So that's a theme as we revise goal 4 and the corresponding objectives. We'll plug that in as well. So I think that comment falls under that. Any other final thoughts? If not, I had one more item for you this evening and a wrap-up comment. Okay, so here's where we are in the process. We have all of the chapters coming together and undergoing some version of review. We are working with a copy editor, so as chapter 9 had not gone through the copy editing process, but it'll be tightened up just a little bit more as we get there. The next 3 months, October, November, December, is the Parks Commission big push to get the draft plan pulled together. It's an entirety, complete the review, and then do the handoff to the City Council in January. Our schedule and capacity may not allow for us to come back and have another meeting with you we will do so if something changes. Elaine will probably get you the draft, but we would like to have an Open Space Conservancy Trust member join the Parks and Rec Commission for the remaining meetings where the pros plan is being discussed, to help, convey ideas between your board and the Parks Commission, and also to make sure your interests are being represented. And you don't have to decide before I leave tonight, but maybe by the end of your meeting, by consensus, it doesn't even have to be a formal motion. And then Meryl and I will make sure whoever you select, because I'm sure you have nothing better to do right now than go to more board meetings, is brought into the remaining Parks and Rec Commission meetings. And Elaine, correct me if I'm wrong, the trust meets again in
November.
Yeah, third week in November.
So what we're likely to do is to get you the draft plan in October, probably hand it off to you outside, the whole plan outside of one of your meetings, and then provide an opportunity, if your schedule allows, for any final comments at your board meeting in November. We do still want someone from the trust, if possible, to participate in those remaining part meetings.
All right, well, at this time, I can open up the floor for a volunteer. And I see Marie raise her hand. Would you like to take on the role of liaison with the Parks and Rec Commission?
Marie, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know.
Silent, yes.
I mean, my view of the role would be to go and listen and then make sure I circle back with people here. And because, and sort of get people's feel for how they think as well as how I think. But I've always been sort of interested in the interaction of the trust board and the Parks and Recs Commission. I think it's needs to be highlighted. So is anybody else? I mean, I would love to do it, but it's up to you guys.
I'm fine with Marie. Yeah.
Yeah. I had an interest in it, but it's fine with me if you would like to take that role. All right.
Be great. And perhaps if Marie can't make a meeting, you could attend and replace Tom or something like that.
Oh, yes, that's a great idea. I could be the alternate.
Yeah, I like that idea.
All right, so that sounds like a plan. Are there any objections? Hearing none, that will be our liaison structure.
So I have a question, Elaine. If I do this, would I be able to type up a little minute and give it to you for distribution? I mean, I don't care if it gets read by the public, but is that the appropriate way to handle that?
Yes, I would just ask that, if everyone is CC'd on it, that there's just no reply all, so that we can't constitute
Right.
meeting. Yes,
Can I put my telephone number in?
I can put your telephone number in.
I put Tom's in.
Okay. Well,
Marie, yeah, if I may too, I want to set expectations, because we're inviting a representative from the Trust and the Arts Council to be more than just a listener, but to participate in these discussions. So
that was my second question.
yeah, if you, and I know because the timeline is compressed, I wish that we had 6 more months, because we would have done a lot more back and forth with the boards, but we have to get this plan adopted so that we can become eligible again for state grants, and March is the hard stop. So
Wow.
your colleagues here are trusting you to speak on their behalf. And and that's why we're inviting you to join, so that as the Parks Commission is working through the final revisions, something is just not aligning with what the trust was looking for, or you have an addition, I really would encourage you to speak up.
Mm-hmm. No, and I was hoping that was what you were going to say. So, people go ahead and email me if you think of something or want a question asked. But I also will try to send a minute back and say, here's how things are evolving to everybody.
And I would just ask that everyone use your city email and not your personal emails to communicate on this.
Right, which brings me, I need to get with you, Deb, because there's some hiccup with my email and I tried to fix it and it wouldn't let me.
That's okay, Marie. I will work with you probably next week on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, that was the final item on our cost plan overview and review. So if there are no further comments on that.
Thank you for having me this evening. It was a very productive conversation. I appreciate all of you.
Yes, thank you.
I just want to put one more plug in for our open house next week, next Tuesday. I'm going to send Elaine the link for registering for that meeting. That'll put it on your calendars and we'll be able to get breakout sessions, set up ahead of time. So hopefully, Elaine, if you could pass that along, if you haven't already, I'll send that over to make it easy for you. Thanks.
Yeah, I saw it on the city thing and I've already registered.
Great.
Okay, so the next item on our agenda is the annual herbicide application report. And I guess that will be Elaine, or is it? Yes.
This will be Lizzie taking.
Okay.
So I'll turn the floor over to her.
Hi.
Greetings.
Thanks for having me today. I am here to, like y'all said, I'm here to talk about the herbicide use in Pioneer Park and Ingstrom in the last year and upcoming year. So this is just for a little bit of context. I don't know how many of y'all have been through one of these presentations before, but this is my first one. So I've been reading up a bit on the herbicide use protocol for Pioneer Park and Ingstrom to remind myself some of the specifics in that protocol, and outlined in it is that the city staff will report to the trust annually on recent use and planned uses of herbicide for the coming year. So what I would like to do is run through what was done last year and what we're planning for this year, and then also get into some details about specifically what those things mean and what types of weeds we're treating with herbicides, and in what ways we're actually doing it. And I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all have about that. So if it's all right, I'm gonna try to share my screen. We'll see how it goes. I have had, oh, nope, hold on. I have had a bit of a spotty internet connection, so please just interrupt me if I'm getting spotty, and hopefully we can figure something out. Okay, let's see. I believe I'm sharing a screen now. Can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is one of the exhibits that was included in that staff report on herbicide use. And so this is showing what was done in 2020. So because of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the monitoring for weeds around the island was paused because we had a lot of staff shortages and we didn't end up having a seasonal crew last year. There was still monitoring done for knotweed, yellow flag iris, and garden loosestrife, and none of those were found in Pioneer Park last year. So that's really good news. We did have contractors working in the parks, and what is shown in this light blue, bluey green color here is there areas in the parks in Pioneer and Ingstrom where contractors were doing some invasive tree treatment. So that a lot of the invasive trees have already been managed. And so they were kind of going back through and finding sprouts and treating those sprouts or smaller trees for the most part in those areas. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in a minute about specifically what trees we're talking about and how those are treated, but just wanted to show y'all the areas in the park where those were managed last year. And then for this year, oh no, this is the map that I included. So we will be having 2 zones where there's contractors doing invasive tree treatment again, coming back through and looking for those sprouts and trees that are growing that we could manage with herbicide and hopefully take care of those populations. Up here in yellow, we have yellow Archangel populations, a few different infestations that we spotted this year. So some of them were pretty small infestations, and we were able to have our natural resource crew dig out those small infestations, and we'll be keeping a really close eye on those over time. Hopefully they will continue to get smaller over time and we won't need to use herbicides on those, but there are a few larger populations that we will be using herbicides on up here in the north edge of the northwest quadrant. And then I also did want to call out that there was spraying for 2 small patches of shiny geranium here in this green pad or green spot there. And I will talk about that. I just want to be upfront about the fact that that shiny geranium is not a weed that's actually listed in the herbicide use protocol. I'll kind of get into how that came about and talk about whether it should be in the future and if that's something we want to discuss as a group. But yeah, so getting into the specifics of that invasive tree treatment, these are woody trees and shrubs that grow in our forests and take over, can kind of take over a whole area. They spread really easily and they're very difficult to manage. We have holly, which is pictured here, and everyone's familiar with that one. That one's very common and was identified as a pretty big problem in Pioneer Park in the past. So we're trying to be aggressive about managing invasive holly. We also have a lot of laurel that grows. So this is English laurel that we need to manage with herbicides in the park. And for the most part, what I've seen are a lot of holly and laurel, and there are some other ones that we'll see that's on this list here that, like, for example, I saw Portugal laurel just the other day in Pioneer Park, but for the most part, we're treating holly and laurel species. And the way that we do that is very targeted and trying to minimize the amount of herbicide needed. So for a larger tree, we use a little capsule, a copper capsule filled with herbicide that you inject into the side of the tree, and that gets absorbed into the trunk of the tree and then circulated down into the roots and through the plant, and it kills the plant. And then for smaller plants that are too small to inject with that little capsule, we will cut the plant or cut the tree down and then paint on a very small amount of concentrated herbicide. So that's what we mean when we're saying that we do invasive tree treatment in the different areas, is looking for specific trees and with a very targeted approach, applying herbicide to them. Yellow Archangel is this pretty beautiful plant, actually, that is very aggressive and will take over the entire forest floor if we let it. So we've been pretty aggressively trying to manage that in Pioneer Park over time. It's an herbaceous plant that spreads really easily with stem fragments and roots, and then also with seeds. So it's pretty tricky to handle. This is a Class B noxious weed that isn't required to manage in King County, mostly because there's so much of it around, but it is recommended that we try to manage it. And that is treated with glyphosate and a surfactant that allows the glyphosate to actually stick to the plant. So we spray that on the leaves so that the leaves are wet, and make sure to not spray enough that it's even dripping off of the plant. So very controlled, small amount of spraying that happens with that one. And then this last plant, shiny geranium, that will be was treated this year already. This is a very aggressive weed that resembles a lot of geraniums that we have growing around that are not quite as big of a deal. So we have Herb Robert, that probably some of you know, and also Dovefoot geranium that looks sort of similar. So it's a tricky one in that way, but this shiny geranium can be extremely aggressive and really take over the ecosystem, the forest floor ecosystem in shady areas and forested parks like we have at Pioneer and Engstrom. This is a regulated Class B noxious weed in King County, and the county requires that private and public landowners control it. So this was treated by a staff person from King County Noxious Weeds Department. During the staff transition with my role, Kim Frappier had reached out to King County Noxious Weeds to ask for their support in managing some of those regulated weeds around the island. And back in April, when Kim had left, but before I had started in my role, we had someone from King County Noxious Weeds come in and see this infestation, and it was small enough and that is the right time to manage it with herbicides. So he went ahead and took care of it. So that's something that is not actually covered in the herbicide use protocol, but maybe regulated weeds should be covered. So that's a topic that we could talk about. And that's all I have for y'all. So it's not a lot of herbicide use this last year or this coming year, but that's what we've got. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen there.
Since you are using a spray on the planned area for the yellow Archangel management at the north edge of the northwest quadrant, I would recommend alerting the neighbors before the spraying is done, if that's not normally done, or it should be part of the standard protocol.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. There is a private property that has the yellow Archangel growing on it. So it was a part of my plan to reach out to that landowner and let them know about that plant. And so, yeah, I can include those other folks that have a shared border there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's my only comment. Any other comments on the herbicide use report or plan? Okay, then we can move on.
Actually, let me just,
Oh,
sorry, one more thing real quick.
Right.
I do think it's worthwhile to amend that protocol at some point in the future to allow for regulated weeds, because it's sort of a gap in our protocol that we follow versus what we're required to do by the county. So we will come to you at some point in the future with an amended protocol that includes those regulated weeds, and that will be a future agenda item, but just wanted to put that out there that it's.
Okay, so you would just add that to the plan and then present the plan to the board at a future date.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right.
Okay, then let us now move to the 84th Avenue parking pilot project discussion. Would you like to present that, Elaine?
Yeah, I'll just start it off. I don't have a lot for you in terms of content, but I'll pull up just a quick PowerPoint that has a few photos on it and just a reminder of how we got here. And then I will allow you all to have your discussion about next steps on this issue. Let me pull this up. Okay, is everyone able to see that? I may have frozen. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes. It's visible now, Elaine.
Okay, great. Thank you. So again, this is about the pilot project that we discussed at the July meeting. Just as a reminder, the location that we're talking about is the west edge of the northwest quadrant along 84th Avenue Southeast. And specifically, we're talking about this small gravel pullout area, parking area right near the Hazelnut Trailhead and just the areas just to the north and south of that trail. Some background again, so at the July 15th meeting, the trust discussed this issue all along 84th and ultimately decided to ask staff to launch a pilot program to cordon off this area and just to encourage on-street parking. And then evaluate the response. So in early August, Lizzie worked with the crew to have this fence erected. As you can see, it was unobtrusive. It was a simple stake and rope fence. They did hang some fluorescent flagging tape on there just to increase visibility, and then a little bit of wood around the bottom, which I think is just a good reminder to everyone, maybe just not to duck under the fence and just go about sort of the normal compaction activities. So a good add there. On August 25th, Lizzie came back and posted signage on many of the stakes along this area periodically, just really explaining what this was about. I know we did have some questions, so explaining that if this were to move forward, we would be looking at revegetating the area behind the rope. And it also included a sentence about really valuing feedback and encouraging people to write in with comments or contact staff. And we did, in fact, receive 9 emails in regards to this project, and those are included in the agenda packet for this week. With that, this is just a few more photos of the flagging or of the fencing. I thought the middle one was maybe particularly interesting because this is the one area right at the trailhead where we didn't have fencing, and they really wanted to park off the street. So they used that area instead, which I thought was instructive. So with that, I will turn it back over to Tom and stop sharing my screen.
Okay, well, according to my observation, that cordon is working well. I did notice the brush at the bottom and thought that was going to inhibit pedestrian travel, but since I understand that it's to actually set aside that area for revegetation, that makes good sense. Yes, Craig?
Hey, Tom, I thought the program worked really well. I think we got all the information we need. I like the comments. They were all over the place. It was very interesting. And I think our pilot program worked really well. And I like the idea of revegetating that area. And once people get used to parking on the street, I think some of the people who were really upset didn't quite get the concept that they would still be allowed to park on the street. And the street is so darn wide, I'm not concerned at all about pedestrian or bicycle safety of joint use. And most everybody I know, they don't walk on 84th at all, they walk in the park. So I think it turned out really well. And I'm looking forward to maybe just keeping it fenced off for a while until we figure out sort of a more permanent way of keeping people out of there. But I think it worked well.
Yeah, this is Lisa. Didn't raise my hand, but I thought it was a great pilot project. And we got some really good feedback from Don Cullen. And, I feel like my sense, and maybe I'm wrong, but is people were parking off the street because they were afraid of obstructing traffic. And once they realized that wasn't an issue, they were fine.
Yes, Lynn, Carolyn. Oh,
You're on mute.
you're on mute.
I say there's always a learning curve, when you change things, because it's novel to a number of folks. But I thought it was really interesting. There really was a broad, I read the first couple and I thought, oh boy, here comes the revolt. And I think it was really interesting to see that, there were some folks who were very, very supportive of, of this. And, so I think I would look overall that this was, it was accepted. It's new. People always push back with something new, and it may indicate that there needs to be a little bit more communication in terms of education. And I don't know if that's making sure something gets into the the local paper, or there are other postings besides just what's on on the land there. But but it seems overall that there was a positive response to this, and it would really be so nice, to have vegetation in that area.
Yeah, I mean, my sense was some of these people really didn't understand the concept, and that they can park on the street. And I'm wondering, I mean, I know we posted, I'm nearly positive that something was said in the email that goes around with the city information.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful if we put something in the Mercer Island Reporter? Probably.
Yeah.
But certainly next door picked up on it, and I responded and put an explanation in next door as to what was going on. But I guess, do we have a policy for responding to people who email? I mean, it seems like it would be helpful maybe to just send an email back to Barbara Bauer, who thinks she can't park there, to just explain, yes, you can park there, but maybe even buttress it with, and by the way, this is one of the wider streets on the island. And there's plenty of parking for two-way traffic, for parking on both sides and two-way traffic. And I mean, it would just take not very long to respond, but we may be able to get one of our constituents back on our side.
So I would actually like to ask Lizzie, I know she's incognito here, but if you ended up replying to anyone, just an acknowledgement of the receipt of the emails, because we could certainly, write a response for those that had questions about it.
Yeah, I replied to all of them and said, thanks for your feedback, and I'll share this with the council or with the board. And there was, I think I can't remember who it was who had that, who it did seem very clear that she didn't understand that you could park on the street. I did write back to that specific thing and said,
Okay.
thanks for your feedback. And just to be clear, you are allowed to park there. So
very good. So yeah, I would say in general, we shouldn't be replying to individual comments, but we should take into account the comments that we've received and either modify policy or provide an explanation some way or another. So if we change signage or address the public input in that way, I think that's appropriate. So
Mr. Chair, if I may.
yes.
I do want to caution everyone to be very careful about responding to anything on Nextdoor, primarily because the lines start getting very gray between your private hat and your hat as a trustee.
Yeah.
And the city does not have a way to capture those records, and we've experienced this once before where we had a council member who's not present that made some comments on Nextdoor, and then we had to try and go back and capture those comments because, and literally it's a screenshot. It's a very complicated process, and it puts the city and yourself in a difficult position if somebody asks for those records regarding your comments as a trustee. So to the extent possible, if you see anything, maybe alert staff and let us see what we can do in using a route like email that can be tracked for the record. So
Yes.
Yeah, I did not represent myself as a member of the trust board. And it was a very factual, here's what's happening. And I think I even said, if you have comments, send them to the city. Like it said on the thing, but yeah, I mean, maybe this is a training opportunity. Things come up on Nextdoor that, it's good to tell the community what's going on, but if there's a proper way to do it, please tell us.
Yeah. Okay, I need to circle back, and Jerry has had her hand raised for a while. So what would you like to say, Jerry?
Thanks. I wanted to ask a couple questions about this. The first, I wondered about the soil compaction and read one person who said, I feel like it'll be a massive endeavor to get plants growing on that strip. I hope that's not true, and wondered if staff could respond to that. And then I have one second question, and then.
Yes, I'd be happy to address it, at least somewhat, Jerry. So the process that we would use to reclaim that area would be really similar. I may have mentioned this at the last meeting. It would be really similar to the process that was used in the kiosk area. I don't any of you remember, but the kiosk area at the main intersection in the Northwest Quadrant was actually a parking area for many years. It was gravel and it was severely compacted. And it was sort of used as a turnaround, I think maybe for the portable toilet company and staff. And it had to have gravel added over the years. So really similar. The way that we ended up reclaiming that area and getting it back into a vegetated state, which it clearly is now, it's actually been really successful in terms of plant establishment. And I'll speak to the differences, but is that we used a lot of wood chips. So a lot of wood chips were laid down on top of it. I believe they were allowed to sit for a little bit of time. And then they were actually turned into the soil using a mini excavator. So this is a really common process for reclaiming the soils, just getting organics down further into the soil, and then not even necessarily sort of tilling it, but really just getting veins of organic matter, that mulch, really as deep as we can. And excuse me. And then over, you know, sort of the next year, this is not a quick or instantaneous process, is really continuing to add mulch and turn it in and just make sure that you know, we're breaking up these large compacted areas and getting some moisture holding material back into the soil. So really it's, you know, that area is completely devoid of any organics at this point. I will say, you know, I think it depends where in that area, but we would probably scrape off the top couple inches of soil if it was very heavily graveled, just to pull that out. So
thanks for explaining
I
that.
would say. In terms of establishment, I just have one more thing about that, Jerry, is that that is going to be a really difficult area to get plants established. It's very different than the kiosk area, because the kiosk area is pretty heavily shaded and doesn't receive this really strong afternoon heat that west edge does. That west edge is very baked. And to Hillary's point earlier in the conversation tonight, any plantings that are put in there would require quite a bit of establishment watering. And I doubt it would be limited to 1 year. It would probably be closer to 3 years. This is a significant undertaking. I don't want to give the impression that it would happen quickly, or that it would, you know, not require a lot of staff time. It would take quite a bit. So the initial removal of those soils is a little bit quicker, but soil development and plant establishment take a little bit of time.
So thanks. That is, yeah, the only negative I saw out of all this, or the only caution I had. And I guess to deal with the issue that I heard other people raising, since Lizzie did post signs that said it's okay to park in the street, and yet people still thought it wasn't. I wonder if there is some kind of not permanent street markings where you could show people this is where we want you to park, you know, some kind of striping that wouldn't be forever, just for a period
One of the methods that's been used for that exact reason, and I know this has happened along Island Crest Way in some areas, I believe near Island Park Elementary, is the flexible markers that go into the ground. So they have reflectors on them, and we can get them really in any color, but they really are sort of more of a subconscious reminder that you shouldn't be pulling up there, depending on the frequency that you put them in. But that's a really good alternative. Something more permanent until the plants get established.
And I was thinking about something on the pavement that would say, yes, do park here. Here's the spot you could park in, to show. So great, thanks. I'm supportive of moving forward too.
Yeah. So did you have a second question, or was that your?
It was the pavement.
Okay. And Hillary, you have your hand raised, so.
Thanks, Tom. I just wanted to clarify with Deb, as far as next door goes and what we are and aren't allowed to do legally as representatives of the board. Do you want us to just hold off in the meantime until you clarify the procedures around that? Is it better to be safer than sorry in that respect? Because that's what I've been doing in the meantime.
Okay. A couple of thoughts here. One, I will share with you a very abbreviated policy that the council uses within that's outlined in the council's rules of procedures that I think will serve as a useful tool. Secondly, anytime you have a question about anything that you're doing and whether or not it creates a conflict for you, always please feel like you can reach out to staff and or the city attorney, and he will follow up with you on those items. And then thirdly, this, is when I was looking at some of your past meetings and I went back to our discussions about public records and open public meetings and so forth. When in doubt, err on the side of caution and don't put anything. If you are not 100% sure, it's not like, your filing your taxes where there's black, white, and then you play with that gray area. Don't play with the gray area when it comes to records if you're not entirely certain, but please bring it to Elaine's attention, because she's probably in a better position to respond to something that's out there using the channels that the city has available to them where we can track the records. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, that does, because I know
Okay.
that in the past you guys were saying, and when I was working really closely with Kim, is that as municipal employees, you guys have a totally different access to Nextdoor than citizens do if you don't live in the community. So
Right.
I just wanted to make sure, in terms of transparency and in terms of what was, counted as official record and not official record, that we're
Yeah.
making your lives easier as opposed to more difficult.
Thank you. Thank you. And then, the only other comment I would make is it's to Marie's comment earlier, which I thought was a really valid one. Even if thank you, Marie, for not saying I'm a trustee. That's certainly helpful. Nonetheless, not as much as our council members. It's like when Lisa's out there and a lot of people know Lisa as a council member. So even if she doesn't have council member after her name, there are people that are assumed that she's speaking as a council member. And so just exercise caution. But I'm going to send out the piece that we have in the council rules of procedure, which kind of speaks to how Nextdoor works for us as a city and doesn't work for us in terms of our communication tools.
Mm-hmm.
And please, that's what our city attorney is for. And that's what staff are for. And that's always a safe route to go.
Thank you. Absolutely. I just want to make sure that we're making things more efficient as opposed to less efficient.
Yeah, totally.
And Deb, if I can
Thank
just
you.
add, I made a super, I thought, innocuous clarifying comment on a post on Nextdoor a couple of weeks ago about the use of Roundup to control blackberries in Luther Burbank Park. It was just to kind of say, no, the blackberries are still safe to pick, basically. And everybody assumed I was commenting either in my capacity as a city council person or as a candidate for city council. Nobody
Yes.
considered me to be a private citizen.
Yeah.
So yeah, lesson learned. I've been burned before. I should have known. But sometimes it's just like, I feel like it's my duty as a citizen. I have this information. I want to clarify it. But you will never be considered a private citizen.
Yeah.
Yes, Lisa,
Oh.
I totally respect everything that you said. It was so thoughtful. It was so well informed, and I really appreciate your voice in that space. And I know that you have a lot riding on you as an incumbent and with the election and everything. And I just want to let you know publicly that I have so much respect for how you handled that. And I thought it was great.
Thank you.
I want to jump in just quickly on the Nextdoor thing before we go back, which is just to say that some of you, as Hillary pointed out, I do not have access to Nextdoor. I'm not privy to what is discussed on Nextdoor. I have occasionally gotten screenshots of conversations that are going on, and I just want to let you know that is really helpful for me to know if there's a conversation or a misconception out in the community that you're seeing on Nextdoor. It can help me be more responsive and try and get in touch with folks who maybe we can right the ship a little bit. So just as an aside, I want to thank, I know Don Cohen does it for me often, but Jerry does it for me often as well. So that is always a good avenue for you just to keep staff in the loop.
Alrighty, now Marie has her hand raised, so let's hear from Marie.
So not to beat a dead horse, but let me ask a question. Would it be helpful if we see something on Nextdoor, which clearly would be helpful to the community if they had an answer, to send you a draft and said, hey, I would like to put this in my personal capacity, would like to put this, or does that put you in even worse position? I don't know. Maybe the policy will let us know how to express something by somebody on Nextdoor when it's in the interest of the community for something to be said.
I think it's appropriate to respond to collect those comments and bring them into the public conversation. And I think they're.
But I know that Elaine can't get on and say it herself.
Right.
So it has to be, you know, I can always ask my husband. That's probably not the right answer.
I wasn't gonna say that, wink, 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 but that is, I mean, that's the reality.
Okay.
If you see something, what I hear you saying, Marie, and Elaine, please step in if I'm overstepping, but what I hear you saying is you see some conversations that you think would be really good for the public to have more information on.
Mhm.
That's the type of information, if you share that with Elaine, we have a phenomenal communications guy on board.
Okay.
This is
Okay.
exactly the type of stuff that if there's that much interest around it, the response isn't going to happen today or maybe even this week, which I understand there's that urgency to kind of want to get the information out there. Let us vet it through staff and through the communication tools that we have, whether that's the weekly, on the website, on Facebook, on Twitter, both of which are social media platforms that we have a way of capturing all of the records. That keeps you out of the muddy water. And it encourages the community to refer to the resources that we have in place to educate the public. Nextdoor is not our best option for educating the public, but we have all these other tools. Does that help?
Yeah, and then I actually was going to commence with another comment on parking, actually. Since I think we seem to be in good consensus that the project has worked, I'm wondering how we want to move forward and expand it to cover other parts of 84th Street. And I don't know whether there's better, I mean, I would certainly encourage us to use every possible means of telling the public that we're expanding the program. But I don't know, Lynn, have you thought, or should we ask you to think and tell us next time? What should we do next?
It's really up to you how you want to proceed with this, and what the extent is, and maybe it's going out and looking at the site, you know, as individual trustees and really getting a better idea of which areas you think should be highest priorities, and then us getting back together on that. I will say, sort of on the other side of this, that I want to keep the board mindful of the fact that staff has a pretty large workload, even within Pioneer, and that this, you know, the work that is done here would come out of that budget that we use, that capital improvement budget that we use for restoration also. And that's fine because this is a restoration project, but just so you know, the staff time, the rentals, all of that. And then just in terms of a timeline, if we're looking at actually going out there and doing soil decompaction and soil restoration out there, that I just in terms of staffing, I can't imagine that anything would really start to move forward until we have our, you know, seasonal crew on next year, and after they've dealt with sort of the seasonal pressures that they, you know, that they need to get on right away. So this would be something that we'd be looking at implementing if the trust wanted to move forward with it, probably midsummer next year at the earliest.
Yeah, I mean, I think I differentiate reforesting separate from teaching people not to park there. And I really liked Jerry's idea of just putting the stakes in along because once people have gotten the idea, then if we can extend it. But if I recall, there's also actually one space along 84th that was designated as parking. And am I remembering that correctly?
Yes,
The north end.
I reviewed the initial development plan for the park, and there's supposed to be one ADA compliant parking space at the actually the southwest corner of the northwest quadrant, if I remember that correctly. It was right there where there's the parking area.
So if it's ADA compliant, does that mean we could mark it as handicapped?
Yes, I presume.
It does not currently meet those standards, just to let you know. So we it would need a full review and really a design to make sure if it is marked, it needs to meet all of the criteria, which are fairly strict. So that has not been undertaken.
So maybe we need a 3-part plan. Do the easy thing first. Figure out what needs to happen for the reforestation and the handicap parking. But I mean, if we could get the easy part done first, at least people would learn how to park. So I don't know, what does everybody else think?
So yes, this is about expanding the area that is cordoned off, and you're thinking about moving this southward or toward the southwest quadrant. I think that's mostly where the problem lies, according to my observation. There aren't many people who park north of that intersection that abuts or that feeds into the trail.
Yeah, they park on the corner. They park
Yep.
up at the north corner, in the middle, and at the south corner. So basically the whole length of the street.
So the proposal would be to expand the cordoned area, but I think that we might need to leave some space at each end for people that really need to park in the park. Since we don't have that ADA compliant spot lined out, that there may be some need for a few people to park in the park for the time being, at least. Do you have any thoughts, Craig?
For right now, I think I'd like to just focus on the middle area that we've done and leave the others alone. I think because of their proximity to at the north end to the traffic circle, I don't know that we can park on the street in that area. And then the south end, it's close to the ramp, the curb cut ramp that's there now. And it's almost like we kind of need the city's traffic engineer to take a look at this and not spend a lot of time on it, but give us some ideas, I guess, for or thoughts on what we could do at either of those ends. But for right now, I'm comfortable just sticking with the middle section and not addressing the other two ends.
I'll input a little bit of information, a reminder from the last meeting, which is that not only is an ADA stall identified for that southwest corner, but the off-street parking is actually identified in the master plan for the north end of 84th also. I don't know that it lays out exactly how many linear feet of parking off, and I believe it has expanded over the years, but it does identify off-street parking at that corner. And as Craig said, the road does narrow significantly there as it enters to the roundabout. So if you wanted to expand this staking along the edge, I would just suggest that you do it, shy of that parking area.
I'm thinking, I'm being convinced that we should stick with what we have and maybe improve the appearance.
Yeah, I was going to ask what ideas there were for making this more of a permanent kind of cordon, or is that an idea that has been broached? I mean, the way it looks right now is fine with me, but it might not hold up very well. So
Yeah, I guess I would agree with Craig. I think we need to kind of hold where we are and let, kind of solidify. But I agree with you, Thomas. I think that there's a need to make it quite apparent that this is here to stay. And there's not, the pilot's over and, this is the way it's going to be. Just to solidify that this is going to be the way, and then I think it's aspirational. And I would agree with you, Marie. And I think eventually, once we have a toehold, we begin to expand it. And it may be, the natural extension of that is, the two ADA lot parking spots.
So in general, I think it sounds like we can keep what we have right now for the cordoning, and if it's appropriate, find a more permanent rendering of that fencing or cordoning, and then we can look at expanding it perhaps sometime later.
Yeah.
I guess one of my questions about next steps on this would be whether there's any interest from the trust in installing these flexible boundary markers that are often used along traffic lanes. I will say that they do come available in brown, which makes them, obvious to people who are about to run into them, but not fluorescent.
Obtrusive.
They don't necessarily need to be fluorescent orange. And that could be a possible next step, just to see if those are effective before we're putting any work into restoration of that area, to make sure that they are effective in keeping people off of the curb.
I'd support that idea.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
So we would replace the existing cordon with the flexible fiberglass markers right at the curb.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of this is that, as you saw in that photo that I showed of the car that had pulled into the trailhead area, you don't end up having that issue because you don't block the trailhead with these markers. People can come in at all different angles. And then the other area, which is a fire hydrant that is just south of that trail entrance, the cordon had to go back behind that, and you don't have that issue also if you use these flexible markers. So I will speak with the traffic engineer. I don't know if there's a standard about spacing, but I will certainly consult with her on that.
I'd like to suggest more education, as was, and perhaps you feel like it's already been done, but a second round as those go in to remind people after the pilot project, we're moving forward with this, and you are encouraged to park on the street, not on the.
Yeah, I would go further, and I'd sort of use all of our mechanisms for communicating with the public and say, thank you for cooperating. It's been successful. And what we are now going to do is put something less ugly to delineate that area.
In terms of timing, if this is the direction the trust would like to go, we may wait on installation of anything like this until maybe midwinter. That bill is incredibly hard, and though I don't think that the winter is going to soften it a lot, it will help some. We really want to be able to get those in as far as possible so that they aren't popping out and needing to be reinstalled constantly. So.
Yep, that sounds good. And I think we may put it on the work plan for next year to revisit this issue and see if we want to expand the area that has been reserved, or, you know, where on-street parking is encouraged rather than on-park parking. So we'll bring that up at the meeting in November when we work on the draft work plan for next year. I'd like to briefly circle back because in the discussion regarding next door, I said some comments which might have been misconstrued when Lizzie said that she had responded to some of the people who wrote in. I think it's entirely appropriate that she did that. It's only people on the board that should be concerned about
Right.
how they respond to public comments. So I want to thank Lizzie for taking care of that. And that's all that I had to say on that topic. So are there any further comments regarding the pilot project for parking along 84th Avenue? Okay, then that brings us to Quadrant Reports. So who would like to go first? Craig, you're in my upper left corner, so.
I took a tour through on my new rad electric bike the other day and survived. And the trails are in pretty good shape, getting a glimpse of what's going to be happening when it rains a lot more. So, but everything was looking pretty good. I sent a picture of a tree that apparently came down a couple of weeks ago to Elaine, and but other than that, Northwest Quadrant looks great.
And who else is on the Northwest Quadrant?
Yeah, I raised my hand because I and
Okay.
have the same report as Craig. Things are looking good, and I try and reach out if I see something at the time.
Okay. How about Southeast Quadrant? Is that you, Marie?
Yeah, so I was there maybe 2 weeks ago with Hillary. Everything looks great. We did wander over to the Northeast also, and I would say that where you have resurfaced, that marshy area is very helpful. So, but I didn't see anything that needed correcting.
I think it's just that ever-present issue of the hillside stabilization in the northeast quadrant as you go down to the ravine trail. Not that that's anything new, but you know, just to chime in and say, you know, with the winter and the fall rains coming in, I wonder about the erosion impact coming down the ravine trail.
Yeah. And then Carolyn, you're on the Northeast Quadrant with me,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's obviously, you know, vast improvement from, you know, a lot of the damage that was sustained from the storms. But again, you know, those areas are really tricky, you know, and during the summer when it was really dry, some of this gravel was really kind of slippery. Now my worry is as the rain comes, there's some areas with exposed roots that, you know, are difficult, you know, I suspect for some of the, you know, more challenged walkers to get up and over. But, you know, I think on the other hand, there's been real progress made. And, you know, I just hats off, you know, for the efforts that have gone into it. But obviously there's still some work to be done.
Yeah, I was noticing the area behind the snow fence just above the bridge has been replanted, and those plants are doing well. And that's really working to keep the dogs and trail cutters out of there. So
Great.
I like the way that looks. And my only other comment is that I noticed that on part of the ravine trail, there are some places where bikes and dogs and other things go outside of the stairways. And so we'll just have to keep an eye on that for erosion and add extra cribbing if needed to keep the trail in place in those areas. Yes, Jerry.
Is it appropriate to have a quick conversation about Rita Moore's testimony earlier? I wonder if it is possible to ask Evergreen Bike Association or whatever that group is to delist Pioneer Park.
Yeah.
I wonder, do you know anything about that, Elaine?
I don't. I haven't actually seen that, and I would be happy to look into it just to verify that they are.
Seems like there's lots of places to ride bikes, so we could take one off their list.
Well, and I think we can argue, this is a very vulnerable area in that, we're doing active restoration there and we've got active erosion going on. And I think because of that, we're, justified in asking that, there be more care taken. It would be really nice if those folks were not using that area.
I think I recall that the city code says that you're not allowed to do improvements in the park as private citizens. So that would mean that you're also not permitted to build bike trails and jumps and stuff like that. It's a violation of the city code. So from that standpoint, we could certainly take people aside and say this trail building has got to stop, or at least put out signage to that effect. And I don't know, I don't imagine that we have the resources to enforce that, but just the attitude that it's not something that we tolerate.
Yeah, so I want to jump in here quickly. First, I want us to be careful about not getting into a whole new topic that isn't listed on the agenda just because discussion around items that aren't listed. The second thing that I want to say about this is that the city has dealt head on with some trail building in the park in the past, and we nip it in the bud as soon as we see it. It is heavily signed as soon as we see it, and we certainly will talk to anyone that we see on site. So this is not something we have delayed in the past. If we see any illegal trail building, we really know the time is of the essence and we deal with it immediately. So if in your travels through the park, I highly encourage you, if you see anything that looks remotely like a trail or bike tire marks that go off trail, please let us know about them. We will go out and look at them, and Andy will assess whether it's, some decommissioning is needed, trail blocking, signage, or any of the other methods that he uses.
Thanks, sorry.
So,
Right, I think that concludes our quadrant reports. And on the topic of things that are off topic, or rather items that are not on the agenda, we talked a little bit about a procedure for getting items on the agenda for the next meeting. So rather than discussing them at this point in the meeting, we can collect ideas for topics that we wish to discuss further, and as sort of a substitute for hallway conversations where we might be able to discover that there are topics of interest to other people in the board, and then with the understanding that we shouldn't really be discussing them fully at the end of our current meeting, but we will get them on the agenda for the next one. So I think that the issue that was raised by Rita Moore would fall into that sort of category. Although I would say that being in Luther Burbank Park, it doesn't really fall in our purview right at the moment. It's an area of interest to us, but not something that we deal with directly. But having said that, if there are any issues that you believe at this time you would like to bring up for next meeting, you can raise them. And also, if there are items that come to mind in the interim that you feel would be of interest to the board in general and should be discussed, you may bring them to my attention or bring them to the attention of Elaine, and we will see about getting them on the agenda in that way. So if there are emergent issues, you can report them to me as chair of the committee or to the our staff liaison. Yes, Hillary.
Elaine, I just wonder if we can have some clarification. Are Earth Core planting events going on this year in Pioneer Park? I know there was some talk about whether Earth Core was going to be contracting with the city for that or not. And so I'm wondering if we can get some clarification on that.
Lizzie will give you all the latest information.
We are figuring out a contract to do a couple of small events with Earth Core this year. They won't be in Pioneer Park. We are just figuring out what those dates are going to be and what the specifics and logistics are as far as keeping it very COVID safe and everyone comfortable. But it looks like there's going to be 2 events in October, 1 in November, and 1 in December. I believe there will be 2 in Upper Luther Burbank Park, and then also in Luther Burbank Park regular. So yeah, there won't be any events in Pioneer this year, and that is for a myriad of reasons, but Earth Core's capacity is way limited, and so they're only able to take on 2 events. So that's what we got.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Okay, we've gotten to the bottom of our agenda. So I'll remind you that our next meeting is on the 18th of November. And at this point, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move. We adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
And I assume there are no dissents. So we'll see you all next time.
Good meeting.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.